Ancient warfare, generally an old-school affair where armies face off on the battlefield with weapons and armor, and occasionally something much larger, sometimes seaborne, and sometimes alive. Here are 10 of the most insane ancient superweapons you might never have heard of. Number 10. The Juga crossbow. In ancient times, projectiles were still an important part of warfare, but those using them were usually limited to simple weapons like slings and crossbows. While they could deliver a fatal blow, they weren't exactly efficient. The user had to wind up the weapon or align the crossbow, aim carefully, let loose, and then reload. If they were up against a single enemy or a key target, it could be effective. If they were up against an army, the weapon holder would likely be overrun sooner than later. And that was high on the minds of military strategists during the Warring States era of Chinese history, more than 2,000 years ago. So they created what might be the first semi-automatic weapon in history, the repeating crossbow, which could fire several shots in quick succession. Did it pack the power of its traditional counterparts? Not quite. While traditional crossbows rely heavily on tension to draw the arrow back and propel it forward, these weapons pack much less force. Their strength is that the action of spanning the bow, placing the bolt, and shooting is combined into one movement, making it easier to fire in quick succession. All that's needed is to move the sliding lever back and forth while holding the pistol grip. It fires from the hip as the lever is pumped forward and back. Its main strength was speed, but the early examples found in Chinese archaeological digs were lacking in precision or strength. They were likely only able to deliver puncture wounds rather than fatal arrow blows. This led many to believe it was more of a minor defense weapon than a true tool of war. But these weapons might have had a sinister secret. The key to this weapon was found in the Kuchin Tushu Ji Cheng, an encyclopedia of Chinese history written during the 1700s. It was described as a handy little weapon often used by elderly scholars or women who worked in the palace as a defensive weapon. But they weren't just shooting tacks. The arrows they shot were tipped with poison called tiger-killing poison, which was said to kill a person or even a horse if it successfully drew blood. While the weapon evolved since and was revised several times through Chinese history, the core model remained largely the same, meaning this fast-firing weapon has lasted several thousand years, mostly unchanged. It was such an effective tool it was last used in warfare around the 19th century. This next weapon also made its debut in China, but it packs a bigger punch. Number 9. The trebuchet. The catapult is the ultimate weapon for delivering a large projectile, right? You load it up, you cut the rope, and it's flung hard enough to break down a rock wall. But that's nothing compared to the trebuchet, which was the most powerful projectile weapon before the invention of gunpowder. Designed to use a counterweight and a long arm, it can fire heavier projectiles much further than a traditional catapult. It all started with the traction trebuchet in ancient China around 2,500 years ago. 17 feet high with a throwing arm of at least 30 feet, it relied on manpower, lots of manpower. A large group of men would pull ropes attached to the end of the trebuchet beam, and when released, this created a massive rotational force that would propel the projectile further than would be possible with any other machine. But soon a much better model would emerge. The biggest negative of the original traction trebuchet was how much manpower it took to fire each shot and how long it took to set it up. The model was used for over 1,000 years, with the counterweight trebuchet only being created around the 12th century in the Mediterranean, and later being adopted by China after they encountered it in battle with the Mongols. The counterweight trebuchet uses a powerful weight, a heavy box usually filled with rocks or sand. When attached to the shorter end of the beam and released on command, it does the work of several men and pulls the beam that creates the force needed to propel the projectile. This trebuchet is usually larger, stronger, and requires a lot more manpower to build and set up, but once it's ready, there were few weapons in ancient warfare who could match its power. And there's a reason it stood the test of time. The trebuchet is useful because its basket can carry just about anything. Sure, the most popular ammo was rocks or other hard objects that could be used to knock down enemy defenses, but as weapons evolved, incendiary weapons that could set a city afire could also be loaded into the basket and fired. For those willing to fight dirty, they could even load up human waste or corpses of soldiers felled in battle and seek to contaminate the enemy city with a deadly disease. While the weapon declined in use once gunpowder was invented, who needs a giant machine to fling things when you can just light a fuse, right? It's one of the only weapons on this list that's still recreated frequently today. Recreations have been built around the world, and even in today's world of modern weapons, it packs a punch. But sometimes you need to have something a little more lively. Number 8. War elephants. For steeds in combat, you can't do much better than the horse. They can carry a lot, they can move fast, and they're easy to train. But they're not going to be knocking down any walls, and sometimes you need a bit more muscle. Enter the largest land mammal alive, the elephant. Massive, incredibly strong, and with a bonus limb and tough tusks, it's not hard to see how they'd make an amazing weapon. There's just one problem. They're strong enough to kill a human in seconds if they get mad, and before you can ride them into battle, you have to train them. That's why it took a special talent to train them. The elephant trainer, or the mahout, would slowly get the elephant used to being led by using chains and hooks, then guide them in how to avoid obstacles and follow formation patterns. And once they were trained, they were nearly unstoppable. Although the first elephants were trained for agricultural work in Asia, it's believed that elephant warfare started in ancient India. They show up repeatedly in ancient Indian epics like Ramayana, where kings are frequently depicted riding them into battle. After all, what more impressive way to indicate who's in charge than having them atop the king of beasts? But soon they were used in much larger numbers, being used to provide high ground for archers or to carry heavy equipment. Elephants are so strong it was common for small towers to be built on their backs for multiple soldiers to shoot from. And for those well-trained elephants who could be led into combat, some armies even attached specialized blades to the tusks to give them an even nastier edge in combat. But working with the giant beasts had its downside. Elephants were the first tanks, but most tanks don't get spooked easily. One elephant getting startled could easily cause a stampede, leading to a derailed charge or a trampled army. But they were effective for long-distance military marches, most famously Hannibal's crossing of the Alps in his war against the Roman Empire. Between the difficulty of training elephants and the increased rarity of the animals, many of whom are now hunted for their tusks and highly endangered, military elephants became increasingly rare as modern technology advanced. By the 20th century, they were a rarity, but they hadn't been retired completely. In the Second World War, elephants were used to tow airplanes and do other heavy-duty tasks in Asia, and they saw limited use as late as the Vietnam War. This next fiery weapon was way ahead of its time. Number 7. Greek fire. You're aboard a ship carrying soldiers and you're about to run into your dreaded enemy, the ships of the Eastern Roman Empire. They've got superior forces, but your men are well trained and you're ready to take on their conventional weapons. But this time they're not packing conventional weapons, they're packing Greek fire. And suddenly they pull out a cannon that fires what looks like a massive plume of flame at you, igniting the ship and sending you and your men leaping off the boat before it sinks to the bottom of the sea. Was this a strange case of time travel where someone from the future made sure they had a flamethrower to keep them from losing a key battle? Nope, it's just good old-fashioned chemistry. What actually is Greek fire? That's one of the biggest mysteries of the warfare around 672 CE. It was primarily used by the Byzantine Empire against Arab enemies, and it had two key parts. An incendiary compound, usually a powder, would be ignited, but it wouldn't be allowed to burn out of control. Instead, it would be fed through a nozzle and pointed outward at the enemy ship, creating a concentrated burst of flame that would spew straight forward. With the necessary closeness and good aim, it could catch an enemy ship on fire and wipe out an entire army, or at least ignite its sails and leave them stranded. Of course, the bigger challenge was making sure it didn't catch your own ship on fire in the process. But there's one mystery remaining. Exactly what were the ingredients of this weapon? Greek fire was written about extensively in the books of the era, but they left one major detail out: the chemical compounds. This controlled fire not only worked as a flamethrower, but there were rumors it could stay afire even on water, making it impossible to steer away easily. This led to modern speculation that it could have been made of components including naphtha, quicklime, and pine resin. While it was typically deployed through large carried projectors, there were also drawings of small handheld projectors. What could go wrong with giving each soldier on a boat their own personal flamethrower? It was also placed into flasks and thrown, just like an ancient grenade. While it's faded into antiquity now, Greek fire was no doubt an early forerunner of today's incendiary weapons. But one country did them one better in explosive weapons. Number 6. Holong Chushue. Ah, fireworks. There's nothing like watching them blow up in midair. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll get to watch a multi-stage one go off as it dazzles with one release of color after another. It's all fun and games until that rocket's coming straight for you. When packed with more gunpowder, a firework becomes a powerful weapon, as well as going down in history as the first form of ballistic missile. And they started in the world capital of ahead-of-their-time weapons, China. It was the 14th century when the Holong Chushue was first recorded, and it's well known that they had fireworks and gunpowder by then. What wasn't expected was sophisticated rockets that could deliver more than one stage. And they didn't just deliver a blow, they delivered some great aesthetics too. The Holong Chushue looked a lot like modern rockets, about 5 feet long. It was made of a bamboo too, but they wanted to send a message, so the rocket was given an ornately carved dragon head and tail. Pour one out for the poor artist who had to design those features only to have them blow up after one use. And inside the body would be 4 rockets filled with gunpowder that could give the tube a powerful launch. 4 fuses would be lit, and as they ignited, the rocket would launch far faster than any other rocket of the era. After all, 4 rockets are better than 1, and anyone seeing the rocket coming would run for cover. But you can run, but you can't hide. Because the Huolong had a big secret. Inside the mouth were 3 smaller arrow rockets, and just as the fuses of the first rockets were about to burn out, they would light the smaller rockets, which would burst out of the main rocket and hit 4 different locations instead of just 1. It was the most advanced rocket of its era, and the idea of a multi-stage rocket caught on. It's still used in warfare today, with such controversial munitions like cluster bombs dropping mini-bombs when they explode. While this rocket has faded into obscurity, it made an appearance in the Disney version of Mulan, and we're betting that if it was sold on the fireworks black market, it would be making a return to your neighborhood. Now let's get into a weapon that could serve more than one purpose. Number 5. Scythed Chariot. The chariot was a game-changer in combat. Unlike traditional horseback troops, you weren't fully at the mercy of a temperamental animal. You could carry more than one person per horse, and the speed boost was giving the armies that could afford them a massive advantage. Not only did the Romans make chariot warfare a staple of their military, but they had enough that they could make chariot races one of their many high-stakes sports. But eventually, the appeal of a horse-drawn chariot started to wear thin, and armies started to wonder, what if I could improve this? What would make a horse-drawn chariot even better? If it had lots of sharp blades attached to it. So the scythed chariot entered the fray, and everyone nearby ran. Weaponized chariots were nothing new. Those riding in the chariots usually had swords and crossbows at the ready. What was different here was that the chariot itself was weaponized. Every wheel had horizontal blades around 1 meter long sticking out from the sides, as well as under the driver's seat. These would tear any enemy soldier who was unfortunate enough to encounter the chariot to shreds, and more importantly, it would cut the legs of enemy horses and bring them to the ground along with the enemy forces riding them. They were an effective way to cut through large infantry groups. A fast-moving scythed chariot could bring hundreds of men to the ground if it took them by surprise. So, why did it die out? The scythed chariot appeared to make its debut in the Persian military, reportedly in the mid-400s BC. It saw heavy use in the Persian Wars, cutting holes in the famous phalanx formations of the Greek and Macedonian armies. Armies would learn to avoid the scythed chariot, but that meant breaking formation and letting the Persians gain ground. However, they weren't much use on uneven ground or even against more loosely distributed troops, and they also stood the risk of injuring their own men or horses if they moved in the wrong direction. The scythed chariot saw more use in the era, but eventually faded from the battlefield, although it was briefly reinvented by Leonardo da Vinci, who sketched it as one of his many inventions. And as warfare evolved, the need for new weapons increased. Number 4. The Corvus. The First Punic War was one of the most critical wars of the Roman Empire's heyday, pitting them against the powerful Carthaginian army. They had powerful ships, and while the Roman army was no slouch, they were lacking in the naval warfare department. The biggest challenge was getting to the enemy and fighting them before they made landfall. Fortunately, the Romans had no shortage of engineers, and one device they created would have been lost to history if it wasn't for the writings of Polybius, a Greek historian responsible for much of the writings of the era. He made sure the Corvus survived its era, and even today many historians talk about this impressive and surprisingly controversial naval device, because in one move, it undid the Carthaginians' naval superiority. The Corvus was a bridge attached to a Roman ship with a small parapet on each side. The bridge was around 4 feet wide and 36 feet long, but what made it stand out was that it was attached to the boat by a system of pulleys. When the ship was on the move, it would be pulled up and out of the way. When an enemy ship approached, it would be lowered, and a spike at the base of the bridge would puncture the deck of the other ship. With the bridge fixed in place, suddenly dozens of Roman soldiers would board the ship and ambush them, ending the Carthaginian attack without a costly naval battle, and leaving the Roman ship intact and free to pull up the Corvus for their next attack. It was an ingenious invention. Or was it? While this could be challenging in rough seas, it was still easier than trying to place a boarding bridge manually. The only thing remaining of the Corvus are descriptions from Polybius' writings, so not too much is known about its actual construction. This has led to the spirited debates about how much it weighed, whether it was dangerous to use because it could unbalance both ships, and whether it was actually responsible for several major Roman naval disasters during the era. Modern architects have created their own designs for the Corvus, trying to recreate it and see just how Rome pulled off this impressive feat. Other architects, though, still insist the entire thing might have been an elaborate embellishment, might have never existed at all. But it's not out of the realm of possibility, considering they were up against some powerful enemies. Number 3. Hellenistic warships. The Carthaginian naval fleet put the Romans to the test, and they also taught them a thing or two. Once the Romans emerged victorious, they started developing their own powerful naval fleets. By the 4th century, these powerful wooden ships were among the largest ever to set sail, and must have looked more like massive cruise ships rather than standard warships. Without modern engines to power them, these warships used old-fashioned methods, oars, and lots of them. There were 5 levels, and each level had 3 very long oars sticking out of the side of the ship, with one oarsman breaking their back for each oar. These ships could carry large numbers of soldiers, but they were often hard to navigate and were subject to going off course easily. They looked impressive, but they weren't the most effective warships of the era. That honor went to the smaller warships that would come later. Often known as the Lembos, they required fewer oars and fewer soldiers to drive them and were more effective for stealth-based activities like espionage and piracy. While the massive earlier ships could be effective for storming a port, these smaller ships could sneak up behind their biggest counterparts, send agents on board, and sabotage the ship from within. And that might be the only way to get through some of those massive warships, which were designed for ramming other ships. Backed by rows of rowers pushing themselves to the limit, they could simply crash into an inferior navy, crush the ships beneath their hulls, and train all their fire on the heart of the enemy fleet. But perhaps the most impressive innovations of ancient warfare were on the ground. Number 2. Siege towers. In ancient times, city-states had figured the best way to prevent attacks: simply don't let anyone in. It was common for cities to have massive walls around them, and the only way in being through a drawn gate. Sure, the city of Troy tried that and fell the subterfuge, but giant wooden gift horse plans only work once. So usually the only way in was through combat. But the people behind the walled city usually had a major advantage over those out in the open, shooting at them from the outside. The main strategy was usually climbing the walls, but those who tried often got hot oil poured on them. So around the 11th century BCE, the Babylonians and Assyrians came up with a new strategy: build a fortress of your own. Enter the siege tower. Sometimes as high as 40 meters, siege towers were massive wooden formations built on site. At battles outside walled cities, they would be built as high as the walls of the fortress, with several levels each manned by soldiers. Sometimes the tower would even have catapults or trebuchets built into it, and the concealed nature of the tower made it difficult for the city's defenders to know where to aim to take it down. The only option was overwhelming force, and then it became a one-on-one battle between the fortress and the tower. If the tower was brought close enough to the wall, moved by hundreds of soldiers, the team on top could then easily leap over the wall into the city and take the fight inside the fortress. But these massive weapons had their drawbacks. For one thing, they were massive. Not only did it take especially designed systems to move them as well as a lot of manpower, but one wrong move on the ground could crush people underneath. Then there was the fact that they were mostly made of wood, and one flaming arrow could undo them in a way that the walled cities weren't vulnerable to. They also took a long time to construct, during which the army might be vulnerable to attack, and building them off-site and then transporting them usually wasn't feasible. Not only were they extremely heavy, but they could easily get stuck in muddy ground. Despite these drawbacks, they were incredibly powerful and kept on being used by attackers well into the Middle Ages. But to find the most insane ancient weapons of all, we have to go back to one of the most iconic ancient empires. Number 1. The mad weapons of Archimedes. Across ancient Greece, there were few names more renowned than Archimedes. A mathematician, physicist, engineer, and inventor, he was the Da Vinci of his era, responsible for inventing many of the core concepts of advanced math, much to the dismay of many school children. He came up with countless bold concepts. Some of his inventions, like astronomical instruments, are still used today. Others were just crazy experiments that never really panned out. But amid his many inventions were 2 of the craziest weapons ever designed. But did they actually work? The first was the Claw of Archimedes. Looks like something out of science fiction. It was designed to defend the city wall of Syracuse against warships. While only descriptions remain, most historians believe it was a crane equipped with a grappling hook that would attach to the front of the ship. It would then be raised, raising the ship with it, and sending the crew and their weapons toppling into the ocean below. The Claw of Archimedes may have been key during the Second Punic War, when Rome sent powerful naval fleets against Syracuse only to be routed, courtesy of the weapon known as the Iron Hand. But was another invention even more deadly? The Mirror of Archimedes was not a vanity device the famous scientist used in his private quarters. Rather, his sketches and notes indicated that it was a massive glass that would be mounted to a ship. By absorbing the sun's rays, it would then focus them and reflect them back in the direction the mirror was pointed, right at the enemy ship. The wooden ship would then catch on fire and sink to the bottom of the sea, in a massive scale version of frying ants with a magnifying glass. But did either of these inventions actually work? With so little evidence of Archimedes' inventions left, it's come down to skeptical scientists and engineers to test them by recreating them to scale. MIT professor David Wallace assembled a team of students to test the Mirror of Archimedes. They tried on both cloudy and sunny days, and the mirror was never able to light a model ship on fire. leading most to believe this was a colorful myth. On the other hand, the team behind the series Superweapons of the Ancient World on the Discovery Channel built a model off of what they knew about the Claw of Archimedes and succeeded in toppling a model of a Roman ship. So at least one of Archimedes' mad inventions might have ruled the seas. Strange weapons didn't stop with ancient times. Check out weirdest World War II weapons you've never heard of to learn more, or watch this video instead.